Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that a lot of people have been wanting me to talk about. This is something that I think has become way more apparent recently. It's the question of whether Wizard101 spells are becoming too complicated. And I'm gonna be honest, y'all, I think that's super valid. Let's not beat around the bush. A lot of people that have played this game from a long time ago, and they're used to spells doing maybe one thing or two things maximum. They might be comfortable with spells that do like some things, like, you know, something other than just straight damage, like a hit and bubble. Maybe even something like this card that, you know, literally does damage, pushes overtimes onto your opponent, and steals their heal over time. But I feel like to an extent, you might have a limit for yourself as to how much you can understand a card. When you have spells like this one is a big one. Spells like this, they seem to need a dictionary or an encyclopedia to even understand them nowadays. And I wanted to talk about whether that is valid, first off, whether I even agree with that. And if I do agree with the idea that the cards are getting more complicated, what could Wizard101 do to make this less of a problem for the player base? Now, let's talk about the actual problem real quick. I actually don't think it's bad if the game becomes more complex. And there's a real reason why I say this. I think that if the game feels the exact same at level 50 as it does at level 150, I think then that there's been a serious failure in making the game evolve over time. I also think the fact that spellments generally give you the option of choosing whether you want something that does a lot in terms of utility or if you just want it to do a lot of damage, I feel like that is a really big deal that doesn't get talked about enough. A lot of people, when they look at Wyvern, they now look at it like it's an anti-blade spell, right? That it clears 2 blades, makes 45 trap. But in all reality, if you really want the option of not needing to, like, you know, figure out what a spell does, all of that, especially in PvE, you can always go the top path with your spellments or not even farm spellments to begin with, and you won't have that crazy of an experience. However, the problem of not understanding what these cards do really starts presenting itself in 2 scenarios, right? One scenario is PvP, and the second one, I think something that a lot of people are familiar with, it's like things like the final boss in Novus. The final boss of Novus literally features you polymorphing into, you know, a new form, and you basically have to use the new Rochambeau spells to actually do the fight fast. If you don't use these, it is torture. You have to know how to change school pips, you have to know the school identity of your school, and you have to be able to read the symbols of what you're doing. For example, right, there's an ice and depth form in Novus, and at the end, basically, you have to know that you have to basically turn blades into something helpful to you, and one of the big spells is Oni's Destruction in that fight. If you turn the blades on the unicorn into traps, it speeds up the fight like crazy. But if you don't know that that first symbol means blades and the second symbol means traps, you're out of luck. And the barrier to entering PvP is huge. If you don't know what these symbols do, you're not going to be able to outplay your opponent. You're not even going to really understand the relationship between schools and how to adapt around what you're fighting. Wizard101 does somewhat try to do something about this. They have like a little help option, and you can go to combat, and you can actually go through all of the symbols. But in my opinion, this is not enough. And this is why I want to make this video. I think there's a lot of things that they could add in the game to make this a lot better for the player. I think one very important thing is consistency when it comes to chromatic effect. Now, that's a lot of words, but basically what I'm trying to say is I feel like a card should make it abundantly clear that there is an effect that's school specific. And what do I mean by that, right? Let's look at Snowman, for example. What this card is basically saying is it'll clear 2 weaknesses, and for each weakness it clears, it puts a shield on you and it puts a trap on the opponent. Additionally, the shield on you, that 25 shield, it's based on the school of your opponent. Now, I assume it's to actually save card space, but there used to be a different symbol for when something was chromatic, and basically Evil Snowman, it used to have like a bunch of school symbols on it. I don't know if y'all remember it, but now, right now, what it says 25 shield. It doesn't have any indication that it's chromatic. Meanwhile, right, a spell like Betrayal, it does a chromatic trap. It seems to signal that if you break your opponent's shields and you put traps on your opponent, that the traps are based on your opponent's school because of that enemy symbol and the universal trap symbol. So I feel like if they are going to settle on, you know, a lot of spells having effects that are based on the school of your opponent, then there needs to be a symbol. If the symbol is whatever's on Betrayal, then it needs to be the same symbol on here. That's one inconsistency that I see throughout the game that I think is extremely confusing, because you really, if it's working well, you shouldn't really need to use the spell in order to know what it does, because a lot of the times that's off-putting frustrating, and a lot of people don't even, it's intimidating to a lot of people. The other thing that I'll say is, I think they need to figure out exactly what spells Gambit and what spells clear. This is another inconsistency that I think is very, very annoying. I think a lot of the times they're a little unclear with card text. I think Frost Beetle is a big example of it. What this spell does, right? You hit, and then it clears one of your shields, and then it replaces it with a -60 shield based on your opponent's school. Now, obviously, the card text is fine, you know, in terms of like understanding that. You'll eventually get there. But my issue is, right, on other cards where you basically have to give up something for an effect, the word Gambit is used. I see that with Wraith. I actually also see that with Monster Mash. Right now, Monster Mash, right? The idea of that extra damage is that you have to get rid of your opponent's weakness in order to do the extra damage. I think this card makes it very, very clear that you're literally giving up a weakness. You're gambiting it, I guess, if you want to call it that, in order to get that 230 damage. So why is it that Frost Beetle, it clears, but in the case of Monster Mash, it Gambit? You could say that Monster Mash Gambits because it's extra damage, but then when you look at Wraith, what it's actually doing, it's not doing damage for the blade that you clear. It's gambiting blades for flat resist weaknesses. So that's a real other inconsistency that I see. I think if you personally are giving up something, meaning you're giving up like a weakness on your opponent, you're giving up a blade on yourself, a shield on yourself, then I think the word Gambit should be used. I think if you can't strike that consistency, then it's really hard for a normal player to understand what in the world your spell is doing. So maybe use clear for things that are helping your opponent and Gambit for things that are helping you, because in all honesty, that's what the word Gambit really means. You're sacrificing something helpful to you to get a bigger advantage later on. And the other symbol that I want to talk about is when some spells affect multiple things on you, and the way they've really dealt with that is by essentially putting this little parentheses around the number. I think this also is confusing because basically, right, what I would assume when they have the parentheses based on how other spells work is, if you do something to something, right, like basically this one says you clear up to 3 shields. That's what the parentheses is saying. Then to me, based on how a lot of spells in the game work, is for each shield, you do something additional. That's what this is saying. And for the most part, this actually checks out, right? It clears, this spell clears 3 weaknesses, and for each weakness that it clears, you get a chromatic trap on your opponent. For each shield that you clear on your opponent, you get a shield on yourself. But there are some spells that don't do that. You don't clear 3 shields and get 3 overtimes with the spell that do 190 each for 5 rounds, and then do 560 damage. Rather, you clear 3 shields, and for each shield you clear, it adds a little bit of damage to the 190 that you do here. Now, I really love this concept. I love the idea that you can actually like create a bigger and bigger effect on something based on the mistakes that your opponent makes. However, I think if they're gonna go down this route, there needs to be a whole new terminology or symbol for this compared to just clearing something naturally. Until you really actually use the spell and realize how the numbers work, this spell is very, very hard to understand, and a normal player will have a lot more trouble than a veteran player with knowing what this does. Those are my 3 big issues in terms of how card consistency and how it works are. I think a short-term fix could be a way to mouse over the card and just see what it does, like literally have words that describe it. I think Pirate 101 does something really, really similar, where if a card is unclear, that you can mouse over it and it literally tells you with text what the card does. But more importantly, I have a feeling that they need to add like something that's way, way better than what we currently have, which is this. I think this is not doing it for me personally. I think the symbols are, you know, I'm glad that these symbols are covered. I think those are important, but after that, it doesn't really tell you what each of these actual symbols do. I think that the game is changing and a lot of people are intimidated by it. These are just my criticisms on what the current issues are. I think not only should those be fixed, I think they need to strike the balance between how intimidating a game feels and how new a game feels. That's really, really hard to do, right? These spells, a bunch of them have a no PvP sticker on them. A bunch of them have new effects that we've never seen. These are spells we've seen since the beginning of the game. Now suddenly they do different stuff. It's intimidating, and I think that they need to do a better job in terms of making the cards approachable, especially because if you're seeing level 160s struggle with knowing what the symbols do on the final boss, you know that there's a clear problem that could have a clear solution that needs to be pursued by Wizard101. That is my hot take on this whole situation. A lot of people wanted me to talk about this specific topic. I'll try to make a guide on this if you guys want. Let me know your questions in the comments on what each spells that you've struggled with to do. I could easily answer them in the comments, or I can make a whole guide on this if y'all want. As always, drop a like if you enjoyed, leave us a review. I look forward to reading y'all's comments. Answer the question in the title for me. Do y'all think Wizard101 spells are becoming too complicated? As always, I look forward to reading your comments. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon. And yeah.